You're listening to In Good Health, the trusted news source for medicine, science, and technology. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.
I'm Mayan Vasta Betancourt.
And I'm Greg Johnson. This week, every year, dozens of workers in low-paying jobs die from heat stroke.
There's something like 69 million workers across the U.S. who are, again, indoor and outdoor workers, because indoor workers do face extreme heat hazards as well. The current patchwork approach, it leaves too many people behind.
But first, is the food industry too big to be regulated?
Almost like monopolies. They're more oligopolies. They're a handful and they operate together. They communicate together to ensure no one gets in their way, especially governments.
All that and more this week on In Good Health. "40 years ago, Stuart Gillespie had dedicated his career to researching and solving undernutrition. His path was cemented in fighting child hunger, what he believed to be a major threat and violation of human rights. In Gillespie's mind, this was the food crisis causing the most devastation across the globe.
But over time, it became clear, especially in this century, the last 25 years, and especially in the last 10 years of that we were dealing with a much broader problem, in as much as it was really going back to what really should be called malnutrition, i.e. poor nutrition, inadequate nutrition. And that can be both with regard to deficit or deprivation, undernutrition in terms of energy, protein, micronutrients, vitamins, minerals. And it is also the massive and increasing issue of overweight and obesity, which has multiple detrimental consequences: chronic disease, diabetes, cardiovascular, potential cancers, and so on. So the entire spectrum suddenly became broader.
Gillespie could no longer focus on just one extreme. He realized that both hunger and obesity were branches of the same root issue, the global food industry. More specifically, the greed of the global food industry. To understand how one sector holds so much of human health in the palm of its hand, we have to look back at the decisions made around the time of World War II.
There was a set of policy decisions. Theodore Roosevelt in the US, even before that in the Great Depression, realized he had to really ensure food security, prevent famine, prevent the issues around the Great Depression at that time. And in the Marshall Plan and the rebuilding of Europe after the Second World War, there was a Bengal famine in India. So it was about mass producing cheap calories to prevent famine, but also to use what became an overproduction of some of these staple foods to use as food aid strategically to stop the spread of communism.
These food aid programs can also be stripped down to less PR-friendly terms, like sugar dumping and milk dumping. This practice is when food manufacturers use the guise of charity to offload their extra product on poorer countries. While legitimate food aid programs can be a crucial lifeline, manipulating it through dumping schemes hurts the local agriculture and economy, which creates long-term market instability in these areas.
And that was all incentivized and enabled by big agricultural subsidies that were granted to certain corporations to mechanize the food system, to modernize it, to focus on especially corn, soy, wheat, rice, to increase the production of calories, essentially, through these staple foods.
But even after the basic needs were met and we were no longer under threat of a global famine, the industry never evolved. In fact, the food manufacturers doubled down on the model, and their only pivot was viewing food as a commodity instead of a necessity.
And because of that, the system became increasingly financialized. And as part of that, investors were coming in, hedge funds, asset funds, managers, buying up big shares from Nestle, from General Mills, from Unilever, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Kraft Heinz, Mondelez, General Mills, and putting the emphasis on profit at all costs, at any cost. So as that evolution of this food system was happening, driven very much by an increasing capture of the system by large corporations, just a handful of them, almost like monopolies. They're more oligopolies. They're a handful and they operate together. They communicate together to ensure that no one gets in their way, especially governments. As all this was happening, I realized I really needed to shine a light on what was going on in the private sector.
Gillespie's findings are published in his new book, Food Fight: From Plunder and Profit to People and Planet. In it, he argues that the core reason behind years and years of global health crises is simply that ultra-processed foods are the most profitable products. And since the worldview of food has shifted from necessity to luxury, profit will always be above health. Gillespie says we have been purposefully locked into this system through specific actions taken by the food industry.
Through various means, they have used their market and financial power to translate into political power. And I talk about the deadly Ds. So, they're sowing doubt on the science of the harms of these products. There's the issue of distorting the narrative, issues of conflict of interests, which are rife throughout the entire system, issues of distraction, where small-scale little corporate social responsibility initiatives are effectively positioned, very media-friendly, very high visibility, but they're small.
These initiatives are helpful and do good work for communities, but Gillespie says that they're often used to distract from the much larger damage these corporations do. Another tactic Gillespie points out is the food industry's ability to hide within trade associations, which are influential voices at policy conferences advising on regulations.
Sort of act like Trojan horses in big policy conferences, again, to get to the policy table, to say, actually, we're dealing with it, leave us alone, we'll be fine. We're going to actually voluntarily regulate ourselves. It never happens, or if it does, it's very much delayed and watered down. That's the kind of disguise technique. And the final one is dodging, which often relates to things like tax dodges, because they can choose to locate their tax liabilities around the world wherever there's low tax jurisdiction.
These maneuvers are all made with one goal in mind: power.
The system revolves around the lock-in and the control and the capture of power, market, financial, what I would also call epistemic power of a story, and that relates to the way media pick up stories, and then political power is used to keep the status quo.
All to maximize profit, regardless of who gets hurt. But when the injured party is humanity, how is such a devastating operation able to thrive for so long? The winning strategy is easier to understand if we zoom in on one section of this industry. We recently spoke with Susan Greenhall for a segment about her book, Soda Science, which traces Coca-Cola's trajectory to becoming a global beverage giant. She revealed how instead of fighting back against health research, the company embraced the scientist. And while it looked like a show of good faith to the public, this acceptance allowed Coca-Cola to pull strings behind the scenes and shape the scientific narrative however they pleased. Gillespie says a similar thing is happening with the food industry as a whole. But instead of soda science, they've leaned into the entire research area of nutritionism.
Nutritionism is basically saying the issue isn't food, and it's about the nutrient composition of foods. And what that does is take emphasis away from potential harms that are being generated through the processing, ultra-processing aspect. They just say, oh, no, that's no big deal. That's nothing. We need to just lower the saturated fats, lower the sugar and salt. And yes, that does help. That does improve healthiness. But we do know, and there's quite strong evidence, especially from the US, that something else important is going on that relates to ultra processing. And anything when you talk about ultra processing is fundamentally corporate, and it's large scale, and it relates to the behaviors and the products and the practices of the large corporations that need reining in.
By focusing on specific nutrients, the industry is able to once again distract from the core issue of ultra-processed food.
They're very happy to have that focus because they can play around with the different levels. It's fine for them. It's no big deal. But it's when the spotlight gets shone on their whole modus operandi, which is about processing a whole array of different products to maximize profit, to enable demand to continue at high levels, even though basically they're the same products, they're just different colors, or, they don't want the light shone on the ultra processing side. And now that more evidence is coming up on the harms of that, we know that nutritionism is a failed approach to looking at the problem and ultimately to addressing it.
Gillespie says we need to zoom out and use all of the context to approach this problem. It's not simply an issue of how much protein is in a product. Real change comes from looking at the entire ecosystem of this industry.
We need to have more researchers working in nutrition who are not just looking at what's inside the food and working with different levels, but look at the entire political and the commercial aspect of the system, and being able to talk across those boundaries to challenge what they will discover are problems, and also, importantly, come up with solutions. So there are big challenges for researchers to get a bit more political about looking at this kind of black box of the political economy of nutrition, which when I grew up, we were told to stay away from politics. That has to change.
There's a relatively new area of research that seems to be a step in this direction, called commercial determinants of health. It was defined in the last decade and studies how the private sector impacts public health, either positively or negatively. This includes factors like supply chains, product packaging, lobbying practices, and targeted marketing.
We have been slow in the food world to pick that up, because I think we need to say, look, wherever the causes lie, at what level, from immediate to more kind of distant, we should be engaging as researchers with understanding what is going on, because we should be engaging with trying to turn it around. And you can't do that unless you really know what's going on. And therefore, I think it's naive to just ignore politics. It's naive to ignore the kind of profit motivation. There's nothing necessarily wrong with profit if the parameters in the system have been set by government to say this is allowed, this isn't allowed, these products are allowed, these aren't. If that is done, you can make profit within that, and there's no problem with that. So this is not about killing capitalism necessarily. It's about a more human-focused and planet-focused approach to development and to society and economy, essentially.
While Gillespie's book outlines all of the damage done by the food industry, it also provides a framework of solutions he believes will evolve the system into a model that benefits humanity. Tune in next week to hear Gillespie outline what he believes can save consumers before the system gets too out of control to wrangle back in. His book, Food Fight, is available now. You can find more information about Stuart Gillespie and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.
Coming up, what policies are in place to protect outdoor workers from extreme heat? When In Good Health returns. In recent years, the summer season has felt brutally hot across most of America, and this year was no exception. And though it made outdoor activities more draining, few populations felt the impact of this temperature more than the people laboring outdoors or in extreme heat environments without air conditioning. Every year, dozens of workers, usually in low-paying jobs, die from heat stress, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. As of today, there are no federal mandates protecting these workers. Pamela Woloski is president of the board of directors of the American Society of Safety Professionals. She says people working in construction, manufacturing, and agriculture are more at risk for heat exposure. The extreme conditions in these hot environments create the potential for a variety of heat-related illnesses. Some of them are minor, like cramps or a rash, but others are far more serious.
A person starts off with just maybe some fatigue or headaches and progresses more and more to disorientation and perhaps even fainting at the later stages. Heat exhaustion is progressive. If you don't stop and care for the symptoms, it will continue to get worse. And then the last is the worst, which is heat stroke, which is a life-threatening medical condition that requires immediate medical attention if the person is going to survive.
Heat stroke is like any other stroke where the brain has been deprived of oxygen.
And in this case, it's because the systems in our body that regulate our internal core temperature are not functioning properly due to exposure to heat. And a person who does not get medical attention either could die or could end up with some debilitating after effects like partial paralysis or difficulty speaking or permanent kinds of seizures.
Despite the dozens of annual deaths, there are no federal regulations mandating heat-related protections for workers. However, the Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration, or OSHA, has proposed regulations that are currently in draft status.
We don't know when or if that rule will be approved and published so that employers will have to comply. But we know that several other states like California, who are regulated under their own state programs, do have regulations dealing with heat and heat stress. And the American Society of Safety Professionals recently published its own voluntary standard on heat stress, which provides guidance to employers. The standard is intended to address construction and demolition operations. However, the recommendations and the guidelines that are in that particular standard are really applicable and adoptable to just about any kind of industry where workers are outdoors.
Wolosky says the ASSP standard can also be adopted to indoor workers. This could include manufacturing environments such as steel mills or any facilities with extreme heat conditions. So far, only 7 states manage their own heat-related safety standards. Those states include California, Colorado, Maryland, Minnesota, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. However, the scope of these regulations vary state to state. For example, Washington's standard only covers outdoor workers, and Minnesota's standard protects only indoor workers. Caitlin Parody is the Development and Strategic Programs Liaison at the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health in Phoenix. The organization's national campaign called Fired Up Workers for Heat Justice unites workers across the country to push for access to water, shade, rest, and emergency communications. They also advocate for heat training and acclimatization periods.
These are very, very basic, low-cost interventions, and there are great model standards out there, whether you're talking about what's been proposed, or what's been passed, at various state levels, right? But until it's enforceable, until it's a requirement, we know that it's not really real for most workers on the ground.
Sadly, Parody says the vast majority of employers don't follow best practice recommendations when it comes to heat safety.
And so that's really why we know that we need a very strong, very clear, enforceable standard, and that should happen at the federal level. We need there's something like 69 million workers across the US who are, again, indoor and outdoor workers, because indoor workers do face extreme heat hazards as well. But yeah, 69 million workers across the US at risk. And what the current patchwork approach it leaves too many people behind.
In addition to frequent breaks for water, shade, and rest, both the ASSP standard and the Fired Up campaign recommend the buddy system. On a June day in 2021, 38-year-old Sebastian Francisco Perez was digging an irrigation ditch under the blazing hot sun at a plant nursery in Oregon. The huge field of baby evergreen trees offered no shade. When the temperature spiked at 106 degrees, Perez collapsed. No one noticed he was missing until hours later. By then, it was too late. Paramedics could not revive him.
The buddy system is critical. And what we see when you look at the worker heat deaths is that often when people are dying, they're dying because they're working alone, right? And so there's no one there to notice that someone's starting to be disoriented, feel confused, right? No one there to call 911 if someone collapses. So the buddy system is really crucial, and it's absolutely feasible.
California implemented this policy in 2005, and Perez's death prompted Oregon to follow suit in 2022. Currently, many low-wage employees see no improvements when they complain to management about unsafe working conditions. That is, if they even feel safe bringing it up in the first place.
Unfortunately, particularly for low-wage workers who are working in the most exploitative industries, retaliation is really more the norm than the exception. I've heard workers here in the day labor community talk about working in roofing jobs where there's technically water available, but you have to climb off the roof to get it, and you're really discouraged, from climbing off the roof, right? So I think certainly there's high road employers out there, and those are the folks who are going to take recommendations and run with them and do them well. But the folks who are the most at risk, who are in the lowest wage jobs, working for the most unscrupulous employers, they're really going to be retaliated against if they speak up. And certainly those are the folks who are at the highest risk of dying.
In another instance, a local Phoenix airport didn't have a functional cooling station for workers on the tarmac where temperatures climbed to over 118 degrees. Because his complaints to management fell on deaf ears, a worker complained to the city council instead. His employers subsequently threatened him with termination from his job. Coincidence? Parody doesn't think so. And yet, she has hope for the future.
You can have these small groups of workers who are getting active and getting organized and leading campaigns and end up, really having a big impact on many, many, many workers. So under Fired Up right now, for example, There's, even without a federal standard, there's state and local campaigns that have the potential to win these protections for 10 million workers. And that's really, those campaigns have come about from people who have everything to lose by speaking up, but do it anyways, right? Because they know that there's absolutely no reason that their employers can't provide them with these really basic life-saving protections like water, shade, and rest.
You can find more information about Pamela Waloski, Caitlin Parody, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer and co-producers this week are Polly Hansen and Amira Zaviri. Our lead producer is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Greg Johnson.
In Good Health returns in just a moment.
Medical notes this week. People marked as brain dead may have been misdiagnosed. Thousands of patients are labeled as unresponsive each year, but new research reveals that 25% of those assumptions are wrong. Some patients are conscious, they just can't show it. Thankfully, a new AI tool called See Me can detect small signs of consciousness by analyzing microscopic facial movements. In fact, it can identify awareness up to 8 days earlier than current methods. Ultra-processed foods aren't just bad for our gut. Research published in the journal Cell Metabolism shows that these products are detrimental to male fertility. Over the last 50 years, sperm quality has plummeted. Even when not eaten in excess, ultra-processed foods expose us to higher levels of pollutants that harm our reproductive health. If you want to reverse your age, it's time to hit the gym. While running is great for cardiovascular health, lifting weights appears to be the most beneficial for slowing the aging process. Research in the journal Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise reveals that resistance training is good for our nerve health. It prevents nerve degradation, which improves motor function and independence as we age. This type of training will help older adults preserve strength and avoid age-related disability. And finally, if your voice seems to be changing, it could be hormonal shifts. New research reveals that the hormone fluctuations that occur during menopause can cause unwanted voice changes, like roughness and hoarseness. The researchers urge doctors to send women experiencing these symptoms to voice specialists instead of passing the unwanted changes off as normal. The research is published in the journal Menopause. And that's Medical Notes this week. I'm Mayan Vasta Betancourt.
Thank you for joining us this week and every week as we break down the science stories you need to know. You can find all of our past segments and guests on our website at ingoodhealthpodcast.org or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and X for more behind-the-scenes content. Tune in next week for another edition of In Good Health.